Let us start with the 14th lecture. Today also we will see some economy topics. Our first topic is that government has brought cooperative banks under direct supervision of RBI for better regulation, and this was done through an ordinance. Now first of all understand that this is not for all cooperative banks. This is for urban cooperative banks and multi-state cooperative banks. Those are under the RBI scanner or RBI regulation directly now, because an amendment has been done in Banking Regulation Act 1949. The Banking Regulation Act, that act controls all the banks and says that RBI will have a supervision over the banks. So now this amendment, this ordinance promulgated by the President gives RBI the supervision authority over the cooperative banks also, the urban cooperative bank and multi-state cooperative banks. In a simple one sentence you can say that this amendment amends the Banking Regulation Act 1949 and makes it applicable to the urban cooperative bank and multi-state cooperative banks. Now this also gives RBI one right. If there is any problem in any bank because of finances or NPA in cooperative bank, RBI can go for amalgamation of the banks also. RBI can go for the reconstruction of the bank also. But also remember that this ordinance or this amendment does not affect the state registrar of cooperatives. That a state registrar of cooperative societies works under the state cooperative laws. So this amendment is not applicable to the state registrar of the cooperative societies who controls the state other cooperative societies. Amendment does not even apply to primary agriculture credit societies which provide long-term finances to the agriculture. So it does not affect the powers of the state registrar of cooperative society, and it does not affect the cooperative societies which are primary agriculture cooperative societies providing long-term finances to the agriculture. So why this was done? To protect the depositors' interest. Sometimes banks were sinking and the depositors' risk was increasing. It has happened recently. So for better regulation, better governance, this has been done so that the depositors' interest is saved. It is not damaged. So this is why this is being done. Urban and multi-state cooperative banks under the direct supervision of Reserve Bank of India by amendment in Banking Regulation Act 1949. Cooperative society is very special. Cooperative bank is just like your cooperative society, only does the banking business. It belongs to all its members who are both owners of the cooperative bank and customers of the bank also. Principle is mutual help, democratic decision making. It can come in conceptual question of the UPSC. It can come. And open membership is provided. So they have the voting criteria, how they establish democracy in decision making. One member, one vote, and motto is no profit, no loss for anyone. It will enable in rural areas of the country saving and investment habit among the people so that there can be inclusive development of everyone in the rural areas also. So they provide various banking and financial services like other banks. Cooperative banks are founded by collecting funds through shares. They accept deposits. They do accept deposit. They grant loans also. However, there are some points where they differ from the other banks. Now, when we learnt about the regulation of the cooperative banks, we learnt about the primary agriculture cooperative societies. We learnt about the multi-state cooperative societies, urban cooperative societies. So let us classify them. See, the cooperative credit structure in the country can be divided into two broad segments. One is your primary cooperative banks, commonly known as urban cooperative banks, and one is rural cooperative credit institutions. One is rural and one is urban. Now primary agricultural credit societies are not banks. That is why they are not coming under this Banking Regulation Act. The PACs, primary agricultural credit societies, provide long term for the agriculture development, but they are not banks. They are registered as societies. Remember that. Primary agriculture credit society, not bank. This is the difference. That is why they are not coming under RBI supervision by Banking Regulation Act amendment. Cooperative banks are also registered under the Cooperative Societies Act, but now RBI will have a supervision. Then banking laws are made applicable how? Banking laws were made applicable to the cooperative societies in 1966. Even they are registered under the Cooperative Societies Act, banking laws were made applicable, but not all of them. Since then, banking related functions are regulated by RBI and management related functions are regulated by the governments. You see, one cooperative society, banking regulated by RBI and governance and management regulated by your government. How this is done? Your government or state government will do what? The cooperative society is under the control of a state government in all matters related to their registration, their membership, election, financial assistance, loaning powers, business operation, loan recovery and audit. All this is undertaken by government. Now RBI does what? Reserve Bank of India regulates and supervises the banking functions of the urban cooperative banks and rural cooperatives like state cooperative banks, district central cooperative banks, and under various provisions of Banking Regulation Act it will do that, but now it is fully applicable to them. Banking laws, Cooperative Societies Act 1955 is also there. So by using these laws and your Banking Regulation Act 1949 and Banking Laws Cooperative Societies Act 1955, these laws are used by the RBI to regulate cooperative banks in their banking functions. But the management function is undertaken by or supervised by a state government. Now, what about primary agricultural credit societies? They are outside the purview of the Banking Regulation Act 1949. So they are completely not regulated by the RBI. What is the condition now? Are they, after this ordinance, are they regulated by RBI? No, still not regulated by RBI. Because they are not under the Banking Regulation Act 1949. Let us not get confused. The Banking Regulation Act 1949 was already applicable, but now amendment has been done to get complete control kind of them, so that RBI can do any amalgamation, RBI can do any restructuring of the bank. Other provisions also they have to apply. For example, cooperative banks were seeing the problem of NPA. So RBI has asked all the cooperative banks, urban cooperative banks actually, RBI has asked all the urban cooperative bank to go for SBAC. SBAC is what? System based asset classification. That means computerized asset classification. They now have to classify their assets, which assets are weak, which are stronger, just to avoid any non-performing asset creation. Any urban cooperative bank having asset of 1000 crore or more will have to undertake this asset system based asset classification. This is written as SBAC, system based asset classification. That simply means computerized asset classification, weak asset, risky asset, and all downgrading the asset also, upgrading the asset also. All this is to be done by all urban cooperative bank which are having asset of 1000 crore or more by 2021. They need to implement this SBAC from 2021 if they are having the asset worth 1000 crore or more. Now RBI does what? See how the regulation is implemented. NABARD. How the NABARD is coming in picture? Rural cooperative banks is regulated by NABARD. RBI asked them that you regulate rural cooperative banks. Now Banking Regulation Act has this section 35(6). It empowers NABARD to conduct inspection of a state cooperative banks, district central cooperative bank, and regional rural bank. So RBI was not doing it directly. It was asking NABARD to do that, and for that you have provision in Banking Regulation Act 1949. NABARD also supports in institutional development initiatives. NABARD supports this state cooperative banks, then district central cooperative banks, primary agriculture cooperative societies, and these you have this state cooperative and rural development banks, and these are some other bodies, RRB, regional rural bank. All these are supported by your NABARD. But what about urban cooperative banks? How are they regulated? See, the urban cooperative banks are regulated in this way. First of all, understand that urban cooperative banks work as a connection between urban and semi-urban areas, and they cater to the needs of the non-agricultural sector. A little urban, so not agricultural, they cater to the needs of non-agricultural sector. For example, a small borrowers of MSMEs, they are supported by urban cooperative banks. Urban cooperative banks are nothing but primary cooperative banks. They are registered as cooperative societies. You know already. They will be registered as cooperative societies under the provision of the either a State Cooperative Societies Act of the state concerned or the Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act 2002. If they are operating in multiple states, they will be registered as Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act 2002. For that, they will have to register in Delhi. Okay, under the Agriculture Ministry, it is a provision. And if they are operating in one state, they will be registered by the state government as a State Cooperative Societies Act. Registered in a State Cooperative Societies Act. Now, the applicability of banking laws to cooperative societies since 1966 ushered in duality of control over urban cooperative bank. because one you are controlling them from RBI, and the management is being controlled by the state government, so that led to duality of the control. The banking related activities of urban cooperative banks are governed by the Reserve Bank, and your management related activities are governed by the state government, so that is the duality of the control. Our next topic is Indian Gas Exchange. Before understanding Indian Gas Exchange, we have to understand some other things. Before that, first of all, understand what is Indian Energy Exchange. See, Indian Energy Exchange, it is the first and largest energy exchange of India. It is an electronic system where power trading is done, and regulation is done by Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. It started its operation in 2008 only. Now, this thing, Indian Energy Exchange, deals with participants comprising of a state electricity board, power producer, power traders, open access consumers, both industrial consumers and commercial consumers who have the open access. So, do you have only one power exchange in India? No. India has two operational power exchange. One is your Indian Energy Exchange, which is the first and largest one, and the second is Power Exchange of India Limited. So now, why this Indian Energy Exchange is in news? This Indian Energy Exchange has created the Gas Exchange of India, Indian Gas Exchange. Before understanding Indian Gas Exchange, understand that India has two types of gas. One is domestically produced and other is imported one. The imported one will come in the form of LNG, liquefied natural gas, so that the transport and import can happen. Now for LNG, regasification will be done. Once LNG comes in the country, in the port areas, regasification will be done and supplied to the domestic market. For that LNG regasification, you have only 6 to 7 plants in India. If you want to see them, this is the map. Gujarat has 3. One is in Mundra, Kutch area, and the lower side you have Dahej and Hazira. Both are LNG terminals. Then you have one in Kochi. You have one in your Dabhol, Maharashtra. Then these were the proposed one, but almost all of them have become operational. Paradip, Kakinada in Andhra Pradesh. Then your Gangavaram Petronet LNG. This is also a liquefied natural gas LNG regasification plant. Ennore in Tamil Nadu. So these are the places. Now what Indian Energy Exchange is doing, that just like they have created energy exchange for the other sectors, they are creating exchange for the gas sector. That is called Indian Gas Exchange, and for that they have chosen only 3 locations now. One is your Dahej in Gujarat, one is Hazira in Gujarat, and third is Kakinada. What will happen, that imported LNG will come here, not domestically produced gas will not be sold here. Remember that, because that pricing is controlled by the government. But the imported LNG, the buyers and sellers can meet on the gas exchange electronically, and they even don't know each other. That will reduce hassles and enable proper buying and selling of the liquefied natural gas. For that, Indian Gas Energy Exchange is created by Indian Energy Exchange. So this is the concept. IGX, Indian Gas Exchange, it will be the first nationwide online delivery based. So buyers and sellers do not meet each other, okay? They do not even know each other physically. But this is an online platform, just like your Indian Energy Exchange is online platform. They have created this. So this will be an online exchange, and it was recently launched by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Launching was done by Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. See, India's natural gas imports are expected to rise. So we need to create a market for that. And also at the same time know that your domestic gas production in the last 2 fiscals is falling, because your country natural gas domestic plants have become less productive. So you are depending more on natural gas. So for that, buying and selling, you have created Indian Gas Exchange. So how much is the contribution? If you create a pie chart, your domestic gas consumption is a little less than 50%, and around 60% is imported one. This area 60% is imported one. Also this thing is very important, because your country is trying to move that in the energy basket, natural gas should be 15% by 2030, and 2018 what was the matrix? Natural gas was only 6.2%. We are trying to move to 15% by 2030. Why we are doing this? Because of sustainable development goals. The cleanest fossil fuel is natural gas. It's not clean, it's not renewable, but among other fossil fuels, the natural gas is the cleanest one. So you can fulfill the commitment made under Paris Climate Deal about your intended nationally determined contribution (INDC), and you can reduce your emission if you increase the proportion of natural gas in your energy basket from 6.2% in 2018 to 15% in 2030. That is why we are enabling Indian Gas Exchange as a market. What will be the nature of the market? It will be a spot market also, forward market also. What is a spot market and forward market difference? In a spot market, you just buy and sell at the same time, right? On the spot. And in forward market, you sign a contract that in future I will buy your substance. So I am giving you a promise. So that is your forward market. So actual buying and selling will happen in the future, but contract is signed today. That is forward market. And if everything happens on the spot, this is called a spot market. That is the difference. So this thing, Indian Gas Exchange will enable both the spot market and future market. Dahej and Hazira in Gujarat and Kakinada in Andhra Pradesh are 3 chosen hubs. So there will be no requirement for buyers and sellers to find each other. It will be online platform. And this will also mean that buyers do not have to contact multiple dealers to ensure they find a fair price, because everything will be available transparently online. But one important line you must repeat to yourself, that domestically produced natural gas will not be sold on the exchange. This is all about LNG import, liquefied natural gas import. Those are regasified at 5 to 6 locations of India. Out of that, Dahej, Hazira and Kakinada has been chosen by the IGX for the India Gas Exchange establishment. Why? Because domestically produced natural gas pricing is decided by the government, so it will not be sold on the gas exchange. So government is deciding the price. So why will you sell this on the gas exchange? Our next topic is by Union Minister of Animal Husbandry. You know, from the Agriculture Ministry, this Animal Husbandry Ministry is separated now. Union Minister of Animal Husbandry. Whole ministry is known as Ministry of Fishery, Animal Husbandry and Dairying. So this ministry long back only had designed this Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund, but now they have come up with the implementation guidelines of this AHIDF, Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund, and also know that this scheme is a type of a scheme for private sector. This is coming by the ministry, but this is for the private sector participation in animal husbandry. So how much is the amount of this fund? Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund will be 15,000 crore rupees. And interest subvention scheme for the 15,000 crore AHIDF and the interest subvention scheme for private investor. So this has two components. One, you are creating the fund, and you are also giving to the private sector investors some interest subvention. So that means if their interest was 6%, 3% subvention will be provided. So the actual interest will become 3% only. 3% will be provided by government as interest subvention, so that they can meet upfront capital requirement in investment for these big projects, and later this will ensure return and payback for the investor. But not everyone is eligible for this. A scheme is applicable, and the eligible people are: one is FPO, Farmer Producer Organization; one is your micro, small and medium enterprises, and then Section 8 companies are also eligible. Private company and individual entrepreneurs with minimum 10% margin money contribution by them. That means minimum 10% margin money must be contributed by them. Okay, so they are all eligible, and the balance 90% loan amount component will be made available by scheduled banks. Scheduled banks will use this fund and provide 90% balance amount, but 10% margin initial amount you have to give, and government will also provide you 3% interest subvention to eligible beneficiaries. To better facilitate this scheme, government is saying that 2 years will be moratorium period for principal loan amount. So the principal loan amount you have taken, you can wait for 2 years, you can pay back later, and your repayment period, and 6 years repayment period thereafter. So 2-year moratorium, you do not have to pay back the principal loan amount at all, and after that you will have 6 years for the repayment period. Then just like your DICGC by the RBI, here NABARD will have a credit guarantee fund that will be 750 crore rupees. And how much will be the guarantee coverage? It will be up to 25% of the credit facility of the borrower. And if you are a beneficiary who is willing to establish any dairy and meat processing or any value addition infrastructure, or you are just trying to strengthen your existing infrastructure, you can apply for loan in the scheduled commercial bank by A portal developed by SIDBI, that is Udyami portal, okay, that means Rozgar portal, Udyami portal, entrepreneur portal, something like that. So Udyami portal is in SIDBI. Here you can apply for establishing dairy and meat processing or any value addition infrastructure, or strengthening your already existing infrastructure in dairy and meat processing industry. Now a very important index, global multidimensional poverty index. Multidimensional poverty, that means not only hunger, various dimensions of poverty are seen by this global multidimensional poverty index. 2020 report has come, 2020 index has come, and this is released by Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative and United Nations Development Program, UNDP, together. So you have to remember that UNDP and Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, these two organizations, this is the United Nations organization, you know very well. These two organizations, one is Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative and UNDP, this together collaborate and release this global multidimensional poverty index, and it is a measure of acute multidimensional poverty. It will measure your acute deprivations, that means devoid of something. Acute means a very harsh, or you can say severe one. Severe deprivations in health, education and living standards. So health, education and living standards, HEL, this is seen by this multidimensional poverty index. And living standard that a person may face simultaneously. If you are facing this simultaneously, you are very poor. The global multidimensional poverty index is composed of 3 dimensions: health, education and living standards, and out of that 3 dimensions various indicators are present. So total 10 indicators are present. We will see every indicator, don't worry. Now who is classified as poor in multidimensional poverty index? Who is having deprivation in all 3 areas? No. Even if they are deprived in at least 1/3 of the weighted indicators, you have 10 indicators weighted. Weight is there for every indicator, different weightage is there. If you are deprived in at least 1/3 of the weighted indicators, then you will be classified as multidimensionally poor. Now you should also know that UNDP has started releasing this report in 2010. So 2020 is the decade, 10-year anniversary of this global multidimensional poverty index. So very important for your prelims, and also it was first launched in partnership with the UNDP's Human Development Report Office. So Human Development Report only has this multidimensional poverty index. So what are the key findings? In the world, 1.3 billion people are in multidimensional poverty. And who is the most affected? Children show higher rates of multidimensional poverty. In fact, half of the multidimensionally poor people, 644 million, half of that, okay, 1.3 billion, half, 644 million are children under the age of 18. 1 in 3 children is poor compared to 1 in 6 if you talk about the adults. What are the regions most affected in the world? Sub-Saharan Africa. In Africa, you have this Africa, right? Something like this. So here you have Sahara and Sub-Saharan area. In this area, 84% of the world's multidimensional poor people live, and in South Asia is the second. Here you have just comparable 530 million people are living. So Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia combined together, almost 84% people are multidimensionally poor here out of 1.3 billion. 558 million and C 530 million. So almost more than 1 billion people are poor here in this region only. One is Sub-Saharan Africa and another one is South Asia, that includes India also. 4 countries who have halved their MPI value. That means a good thing. India is also there. India, if you see 2005-6 to 2015-16 data, India did it nationally and among children and had the biggest reduction in number of multidimensionally poor people, where 270 million poor people were taken out of poverty in this decade by India. So these are the indicators. You can pause the video and you can see that health, education and standard of living. Health has nutrition and child mortality, and both of them has the weightage 1/6, 1/6, so together 1/3. Now education has years of schooling and school attendance, both have 1/6, 1/6, that means 1/3. Now the other 1/3 remains, right? For other 1/3 we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 components, so that will become 1/3. So if you talk about the 3 dimensions, every dimension has 1/3 weightage, but in the dimension we have more and less number of indicators depending on that. Health has 2 indicators, nutrition and child mortality, both of make 1/6, 1/6. Education has year of schooling and school attendance. Both of them make 1/6, 1/6 each. And a standard of living has 6 components or 6 indicators. Other 6 indicators: cooking fuel, okay, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, and assets. Assets is what? The household does not own more than one of these assets, then they will be classified as poor. Radio, television, right? Telephone, computer, animal cart, bicycle, motorbike, refrigerator, and does not own a car or truck, then you will be classified as, here you will be classified in this category and you will be considered poor. So that is 1/18, all of these six, right? So total 1 value classified as 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and among that you have different indicators. Out of these all indicators, weighted average, if you are poor in, if you are deprived in at least 1/3 weighted one, then you will be classified as multidimensional poor. Moving to the next topic, this is National Land Management Corporation. You know, your state companies, the PSUs, and the government has so much of land, but most of the time that land is just left like that and it is not utilized. But what about monetizing that land and doing something there? This is very important. So I already taught you about this National Infrastructure Pipeline. So there was a task force, okay, task force on National Infrastructure Pipeline, who was going to recommend to the Union Government or Finance Ministry that how much infrastructure development you can do so that your 5 trillion economy, which looks now a very distant dream, that 5 trillion economy can be achieved. Okay, just for the data, how much is the size of Indian economy just now? It is around 2.9 trillion, right? Okay, and how much we want to be? 5 trillion within 5 years. So very much impossible. But the government said one thing. Government said that we will be calculating the inflation also. So this will be on nominal term, not the real term. So that is how this can happen. But the problem is that if you increase the inflation, or if you allow the inflation to increase, then you will have problem in country about the inflation. So everything looks very much impossible. But anyway, you have to take a stand with the government until it doesn't happen. So you have to give some points, like, and you have to say that this is not in real terms, this is in nominal term, and the infrastructure pipeline is doing well. The global outlook about the Indian economy is very good. Something like that you have to manage. But anyway, size of the Indian economy is around 2.9 to 3 trillion. Now we are targeting 5 trillion. And the world economy size is 90 trillion, right? 90 trillion. So out of that we are like 1%, something like that. Or you can say not 1%, 2.8%, just for a data, okay, just for an estimation. So the National Infrastructure Pipeline Task Force has recommended that government can do one thing. You set up one National Land Management Corporation, and this Land Management Corporation will do what? You have the Parati land, right? So you can monetize those state-owned surplus land assets in a systematic way, in a programmed way, so that some money can go to the government, infrastructure will be created, and government's deficit can be reduced. So as I told you, the government has the land and your central public sector enterprises have the land. So these central public enterprises and government's non-usable land, or you can say that the land which is not being monetized or utilized, those can be managed by this Land Management Corporation. And it is thought that will be set up as a company through the Companies Act. And now this company will act as a facilitator for land monetization. They can give it for the lease, right? And the asset manager will also be this company only. Now there will be a chief executive officer and a technical team hired. These people, the chief executive officer of the company and the technical team, those should be hired at market linked compensation to carry out land monetization. That means just like your private company, you will give to them the salary which is market linked, and this is compensation is salary only, market linked, and they will do the land monetization. And apart from your CEO and technical team, the corporation should have representation from the government, Finance Ministry, Department of Public Enterprises, because your PSUs are concerned. So Department of Public Enterprises deals with the central public sector enterprises. Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs will be there, as they will be as independent directors from finance, and as well as independent directors from finance and real estate industry. So these are private people, independent directors, just like your company, right? Companies board. They said that this corporation can raise their capital from equity market based on the value of its leased assets. You are leasing, you are not selling. Also they are saying that this panel said that on the infrastructure pipeline said that also you can consider the development and co-development of land which is belonging to defense or railways. So development of that land or co-development, that you are not leasing it permanently but you are collaborating with the private sector and developing that land which is belonging to defense area or railways also, which are very sensitive sector where government says that we will not allow private parties. About that also this committee had the recommendation. Next news is affordable rental housing complexes. These are the complexes which will be created for the urban poor. Union Cabinet recently gave its approval for developing affordable, you have to remember this, affordable rental housing complex. And now you have to remember that this scheme is under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban 1. Okay, so you have urban migrants, poor. Okay, so they will be provided house in affordable renting houses complexes. For that Union Cabinet has given approval, and this affordable rental housing complexes will be a sub scheme under the main scheme Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban. So Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which ministry is responsible? Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. They will be giving this affordable rental housing complexes. For that Union Cabinet has given the approval. Migrants and poor only. It was announced on 14th May 2020. Now new thing is that Cabinet has given the approval. So how they are creating these affordable housing complexes? You have existing vacant government funded housing complexes with municipalities and all. So they will be converted into affordable rental housing complexes. Why this rental? So this is a temporary measure, right? Temporary measure. Complexes will revert to urban local bodies after 25 years to restart next cycle like earlier or run on their own. Either they go to the urban local bodies in the previous mode or they can run on their own. But for 25 years, concessional agreement will be done with the urban local bodies, and those government funded housing complexes will be converted to affordable renting housing complexes for 25 years for the poor and migrants. There will be given some special incentives for these housing complexes. About the permission, you will have a special incentive, less permission required. 50% additional. This FAR and FSI is nothing but floor area ratio and floor space index, that is about the housing complexes size and everything. Okay, and concessional loan at priority sector lending rate, tax reliefs also as par with the affordable housing. These all will be provided as incentives in these rental complexes, and given to whom? Those private or public entities who will develop the ARHCs on their own available vacant land for 25 years. So a little information about Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban 1. It was launched in 2015 for providing housing for all in urban areas, the urban poor and deprived people by the year 2022. So implemented by Mahua Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. It addresses the shortage of housing in urban areas for economically weaker section, low income groups, LIG, okay, LIG and MIG, you remember, medium income groups, middle income group and lower income group, and the economically weaker section, and the including the slum dwellers. All of these are provided the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban housing. So it's not like that always your house will only be provided. There are various 4 verticals of this scheme. One is in situ slum area development. They will develop your slum area only using land as a resource. One is credit linked subsidy scheme. They will provide you the subsidy. Then you have affordable housing in partnership with the private or public sector. They will provide you the housing. And then you have beneficiary led construction or enhancement. If a beneficiary is living in a very small area, so government will do something and you will have some construction and you will be leading your construction, but the government will providing you the support. And presently what is the status? 105 lakh houses have been sanctioned. Sanctioned means granted that you will be constructing houses, and 35 lakh houses have been completed under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban. Also it promotes women empowerment. Ownership of the house is in the name of the female member or in joint name. Now next topic is unified gas price system. You know, in the petroleum ministry you have this institution, Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Body. This petroleum and natural gas regulatory body tries to bring efficiency in this petroleum and everything. Okay, just 2 lines about petroleum and natural gas regulatory body. This regulatory body is constituted by an act of the parliament. That act was Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board Act 2006. So this is a statutory body. Functions include refining, transportation, distribution, storage, marketing, supply and sale of petroleum products and natural gas throughout the country. So very important institution of the India. Now this PNGRB has published a discussion paper, and they are saying that we need to move from a system where buyers of gas are charged for every pipeline they use in the system to a single charge across a pipeline network. You have in country various pipeline. For example, one in 1 minute. Okay, sorry for the bad map because I am just using my mouse. One is your Hazira HVJ pipeline, right? Hazira, and then it goes to Madhya Pradesh and then go to Jagdishpur. This is called HVJ pipeline. Other one is East-West pipeline, something like that. And we are also developing pipelines in your Urja Ganga Yojana. We are developing pipeline from Jagdishpur to here in Odisha, West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand. Then we are planning to go from Barauni in Bihar to Northeast also for the Northeast gas piping system. So everything is being developed, but these are under different state jurisdiction, different pipelines. HVG is the very important one. From HVJ you also get the gas supply to Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, everywhere. So anyway, so the problem is that these pipelines charge differently. When a buyer of the gas from LNG is moving his gas from one place to one place, that buyers of gas are charged for every pipeline they are using. Now the PNGRB is saying that we need to unify this system. Gas is going fine in different pipeline, but they should be charged commonly, used in system to a single charge across a pipeline network. You can understand this. Paying for the same gas at different places leads to some hassles, right? So we need to do away with that hassle, and only one single charge should be charged across different pipeline networks. Again, this is part of a big parcel, that is your government of India is trying to increase 6.25% in 2018 of the natural gas in the energy basket, and we have to go to 25% by 2030. So everything about the gas pricing is done. So this is unified gas price system. So what will happen that if you are not counting various places gas pipeline and you are going for a unified price, that also means that the cost will reduce for the transportation. Setting a fixed tariff for long distances to boost consumption, the cost will be lowered, and the people in the cities get PNG, right? You know, right? PNG, piped natural gas. That piped natural gas when goes in a city, it can go to your companies, commercial companies, industries. It can also go to your houses. Different ways of using this PNG. First of all comes the LNG from the ports, liquefied natural gas. Then regasification is done in 5 to 6 locations of the country. Then that is transported through your gas pipelines, and the gas pipelines will distribute it in cities through piped natural gas. Piped natural gas can go in the houses, can go in the industries, and can also go in those companies which have the distribution network in a city. So for that, if for longer distance we have cheaper rate, then the people getting in the cities the gas, they will have to spend less. That will lead to gas based economy, more consumption of the gas. Government is proposing a unified price system with one price for those transportation gas nearly within 300 km and one price for those transporting gas beyond 300 km. The government is saying that if one person is transporting gas less than 300 km distance, they will be charged this much, and if the distance goes beyond 300 kilometers, they will be charged less on average. Overall might be more, but the average per kilometer distance cost will reduce. It will also help connect new markets because the cost is reducing, so your GAIL and all will be transferring to the longer distance. That would benefit consumers in parts of the country far away from the western coast. For example, Northeast India has a problem. It is far situated from the LNG terminal. When we talk about gas pricing, you have to remember Rangarajan Committee recommendation on gas pricing. This committee, Rangarajan Committee on gas pricing, had said that we need to go for uniform gas pricing at unbiased arm's length. Unbiased arm's length. So that formula he suggested is that domestic gas pricing should be, government does the domestic gas pricing, okay? So he is saying, Rangarajan Committee is saying that okay, you do the pricing, but you do it with an unbiased arm's length, maintain some distance, enable some market forces. Formula for the gas pricing should be 12-month trailing average of volume weighted average at wellhead gas well on the net back basis for gas imports, and the volume weighted average of US Henry Hub, UK NBP and Japanese crude cocktail prices. These are the various prices of the gas in different markets. So he's trying to connect with those prices so that the market value of the gas can be generated, a little bit reduction in the subsidy he's suggesting kind of. Gas prices are expected to increase based on the suggested framework by the Rangarajan committee because the subsidies will reduce. You are linking your gas prices with the market of the international places, so your gas price will increase. There is one news, a special liquidity scheme for non-banking financial companies and housing financial companies. This is announced by RBI. RBI announced that they are coming up with a special liquidity scheme for NBFCs and HFCs, and that will be done through a special purpose vehicle created for this purpose only to avoid any potential systematic risk to the financial sector in this NBFC and HFCs. On 13th March 2020 only this year, Finance Minister has announced some relief for your NBFCs and HFCs. Actually, NBFCs and HFC in the country are seeing severe liquidity crunch. They need liquidity. They are not getting the pension fund and mutual fund investment also because many of the companies have sunken. Then you had IL&FS crisis also. So for that, government is trying to kind of bail out them with some various provisions or trying to nudge the economy in that direction. So Finance Ministry had announced 13th March 2020 launch of a special liquidity scheme for rupees 30,000 crore. Now what about a special liquidity scheme for NBFC and HFC? What are the provision? What RBI is doing? First of all, this is being done by a special purpose vehicle. You have to remember that, separately created for this. RBI will provide funds for a scheme by subscribing to government guaranteed special securities issued by the trust. So this trust, special purpose vehicle, will not be registered as company. This will be registered as trust. And now the RBI will be subscribing to government guaranteed special securities which will be released by that trust. And total amount of such securities issued outstanding shall not exceed rupees 30,000 crore. This is the condition put at already. So that is why government has come up with 30,000 crore only. And now Government of India will provide an unconditional and irrevocable guarantee to the special securities issued by the trust. This is coming by the government, right? So this can be trusted. I'm not talking about the company trust SPV. I mean the general public trust about the government securities. So which companies will be eligible for this special liquidity scheme? NBFCs, including microfinance institutions that are registered with RBI under the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934 will be eligible, but excluding those registered as core investment companies. You have to remember, core investment companies which are registered with the RBI under RBI Act 1934, those will not be eligible. So these NBFCs will be eligible. And what about the housing finance companies which are registered under the National Housing Bank Act 1987? Those will also be eligible. There are some other criteria also that the non-performing assets should not be more than 6%. They should have made net profit in at least one of the last two preceding financial year. They should be rated investment grade by SEBI's registered rating agency. You must have the rating, otherwise you cannot go for this. Otherwise you will just sink with the government money. That will be creating even more liquidity problem in the NBFC sector. They also have to maintain CRAR of NBFC HFC, and that should not be below the regulatory minimum of 15% and 12% respectively. So all of these conditions must be fulfilled, and then for NBFCs, these core investment companies are not eligible, and the housing finance companies registered under the Housing Bank Act will be eligible. So I talked about this special purpose vehicle. That a special purpose vehicle is known as SBI CAP. SBI CAP, this will be a subsidiary of the State Bank of India. The State Bank of India has set up this SPV, okay, to manage this operation. So what will happen? This SPV will purchase short-term papers from eligible NBFC HFCs, will provide them the cash or liquidity, and now those NBFCs or HFC, after selling the short-term papers to this special purpose vehicle, can utilize the money under this scheme solely for the purpose of extinguishing existing liabilities. If they have taken some loan and they do not have the money, they will have the liquidity now through this SPV, and they just need to extinguish or do away with the existing liabilities. कर्ज चुकाना है, बस सही से होना है. And instruments for that SPV will buy what from the NBFCs? They will buy commercial paper, and negotiable certificate of deposit, and that must have a residuary maturity of not more than 3 months. That is why this is called as short term papers. Okay, and rated as investment grade, must be rated as investment grade. Okay, so that your government, your SPV, SBI cap can trust you and provide you the money or liquidity for repaying your existing liabilities. Our last topic for today is bundling a scheme for round the clock power supply. What is that? This scheme is the Ministry of Power has issued guidelines for supply of round the clock power to distributors through a bundling scheme, and this scheme is very first in the world. Now power distributors have been given the guideline by Ministry of Power, but when the bundling term comes, it is about Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Ministry of New and Renewable Energy is saying that even if your renewable energy sounds a bit costlier, but we need to encourage that sector, boost that renewable energy sector. So Ministry of New and Renewable Energy actually came with a draft framework to supply round the clock power generated from wind and solar plants. So just imagine if the power is supplied from wind and solar plants only. One thing is that these are not very much, till now we have the installed capacity, but the power generated is very low overall. Second thing, they are costlier. So we can do one thing, we can bundle up with the thermal power generated, and in that bundle the buyers will have to buy even if it is a little costlier, and that will be ensuring round the clock power supply in bundling scheme, where you have the renewable energy and thermal power together in a bundle, so that the buyers can get assurance of receiving firm uninterrupted electricity supply. The government is saying that we are just doing this for your around the clock supply, but actual thing is that government wants to boost the renewable energy sector. That is why they are bundling the renewable energy with your thermal power generated. If we supply the renewable energy only, this can be irregular, first of all, because renewable energy capacity is not that much. Second thing, it is very costly also. Till now it is not very economic to use renewable energy. The economies of a scale will come only when the boost to the renewable energy sector comes through such a schemes like bundling a scheme for round the clock power supply. And for that, by hearing your Ministry of New and Renewable Energy draft paper and framework, the Ministry of Power gave to the DISCOMs some guidelines that you have to go for this bundling scheme. See, that's what I talked now. Objective of the scheme is addressing issues of what are the issues of renewable energy: intermittency, limited hours of supply, and low capacity utilization at renewable power plants, and they will become more attractive for a state-owned power distribution companies if you mix up them with thermal power generated. So let us see something about energy sector structure in India. Approximately 70% of India's power requirements are coal-based only. First of all, most of it is non-renewable. In that fossil fuel only, also you have 70% from coal generated. The higher cost of thermal power is attributed to rising in the cost of coal imports. So you are depending on coal, so you are importing the coal, and there is no significant capacity addition. Problem is that India has lots of coal reserve, but we are not able to utilize them. If for that only the government is privatizing coal sector, right? Now even not the captive coal mining. Every company is eligible for the coal mining even without experience, so that more coal is extracted, and in your at least you don't have to import the coal to such extent. So we are trying to improve the renewable energy sector also, but at the same time we are trying to reduce our imports of the coal also. Solar and winds are cheaper than cost of thermal power, it is true, but yeah, for only after the economies of a scale comes. So this is all in this lecture. See you in the next class. And yeah, by 19th and 20th we will be winding up the June, July, August month current affairs. Don't worry about that. In any way, either in video or in PowerPoint, you will be provided everything. Thank you.